Alright, so January 1st, 1863, and no, you're not going to have enough time to write all this down, so I'd like you listening. The headline was, Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. Does anybody remember what this is? Does anybody know what this means, Chase?
Doesn't it say to release all slaves in the South?
Yes, it actually is the road to freedom for the slaves. So Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, and yes, it is releasing slaves. It says, all slaves in rebellious states are free of bondage. Few slaves were immediately freed, since it did not include border states, and rebel states ignored it. So, it did not immediately free, since it did not include the border states. So, not everyone was freed. But what this meant was that this was the road to their freedom. Okay? So this was just a warning, basically, in a sense, saying that this was what was going to happen. Lincoln was saying he's standing his ground. This is what's going to happen. 1863, January 1st, the very first day of 1863, during the war, in the middle of the war, that this was going to, he was going to take a road to freeing the slaves. Southern states were liberated by the Union, would soon be affected, though, and it was the first step toward ending slavery everywhere in the U.S. So it was the first step to ending it. March 3rd, 1863, so we're going on another month or two. Lincoln signs the first draft law. What was the draft? Someone remember what the draft was? Anybody? The draft. Thomas. What was that? Let slaves fight in the war. No, it did not. This did not actually let slaves fight in the war. This was signing the first draft law where they needed people to fight. They were starting to run out of volunteers. So Lincoln needed people to fight, so this was his way. What other time have we used the draft? Does anyone remember? Vietnam. We used the draft during Vietnam. Okay, so we talked about this last week. We talked about the draft. This is the first time we used the draft in the U.S. So men between the ages of 20 and 45 who are physically fit, who are mentally fit, and who are not a felon. So you could not be a felon you could not be drafted if you are a felon. You also have to be mentally fit. They need people who are strong, mentally and physically. You have a question? Emancipation, this was the first draft of the Emancipation Proclamation. So it was the first time. So we'll talk about that in the next year or two that we discuss. So this was the first time he put it out there, basically. So the Emancipation Proclamation, good question though. So there are other steps towards the freedom of the slaves. You could actually avoid fighting if you paid $300. Back then, $300 was almost a year's salary. You have a question? I don't know if that was the best path to, I don't know if you could pretend to be mentally unfit. It's kind of like what they did during Vietnam. Does anybody know what people did to try to avoid the draft in Vietnam? No, people did take drastic measures, and some people escaped to Canada. So people escaped, and you have a question, Devin? Okay. So you could avoid the draft by paying $300, or if you hired a substitute. Some people thought they were poor, and they may be drafted as well into the army. So they thought, well, I could get some money for this. Down the road in 2 months, I could be called. So why not get some money for it for my family? Maybe $200. So you could avoid following through with your draft notice if you paid $300 or if you got a substitute. And you often paid less if you got a substitute. So you could pay someone $200, convince them to go, and they could actually that could sustain their family for up to a year possibly. So it's kind of like today. I could say. You cannot do this today and age, but you could avoid, it would be like today paying $80,000 or a year's salary, whatever that would be for one person. So maybe $80,000 $50,000, a lot of money, thousands of dollars in today's money. So why would you not want criminals to fight? Can you speak loudly? Okay, so they could turn on you. So, so what does that turn into? Anybody have? They could steal your supplies, possibly. Someone. I'm looking for. What could you not allow? What could you not do with them? Trust them. Very good. You couldn't trust them. That's what I'm looking for. You couldn't necessarily trust them because they have committed a crime, and a major one at that. Okay? So what do you think was the reaction for people for the draft? What do you kind of reaction? I need some new hands. New hands. Anybody? Anybody? Devin. They'd be upset. Yes, they'd be very upset. We're going to talk about that in a minute. They were upset. People were upset that this started to happen. So Chancellorsville. This is a major battle that where we actually will see that they lost Stonewall Jackson. They actually lost him to friendly fire. They lost him to friendly fire. What does friendly fire mean? Griffin, nice and loud.
Shot by someone on your own side.
Shot by someone on your own side, yes. So this was Chancellorsville. They actually lost Jackson. So it was Lee's greatest triumph, perhaps, but it was at a great cost because they lost Stonewall Jackson. So he was actually accidentally shot by his own men. So Gettysburg. What is Gettysburg famous for? Yeah, it was towards the. It was actually a major battle. It was a major turning point in the war. This was Lee's invasion of the North, and has been halted again. This time by General George Meade's Union troops. This battle, they lost almost 50,000 people. This was the most deadly battle in all of in any war that we've ever fought. This is the most deadly battle. 50,000 people. We've lost less people in Iraq in over a 7-year span. So this was over 3 days, and they lost over 50,000 people. Okay, so Lee's invasion was halted. In other words, he invaded the North, and they were stopped. Does anyone know where Gettysburg is? What kind, state? Chase? Pennsylvania. Yes, very good. All right, Vicksburg. After 6 weeks of bombardment, sending Southern civilians into caves, Vicksburg surrenders. The Union gains further control over the Mississippi River. Between Gettysburg and Vicksburg, the Confederacy has been split into two, and the rebels' outlook is gloomy. So this chart starts to change their attitude. They're not winning every battle. This is not happening for them. What kind of problems do you see? So people were actually sent into caves during this time. They were basically they were sent into caves to escape, and they couldn't go anywhere. So what do you think kind of issues they would have if they were sent into caves? What kind of problems would they have?
Food problems.
Food problems. They would be lacking food. So what would they resort to? They did not resort to cannibalism, but they did resort to eating rats and bugs and majorly yucky things we would consider today. But if you were in that situation, how would you react? Would you want to survive, or would you try to survive and eat the? Well, you have to resort to Stone Age technology, right? So this was not a good thing to be going through. So they actually.